In this video, we're going to look at input and output in Python and how we can communicate to a program, to and from a program using a couple commands called print and input. So up until now, we've looked at how to write functions and how to deal with variables and different types of information, but we haven't had a way that we can actually interact with a program. And so that's what this is all about. This will be a short video to kind of explain the basics of that. So one of the most basic commands that you ever use in Python is the print command. And print simply prints out a string to the console. And so the classic starting point for any programmer is to print hello world to the screen, announcing that you are here as a programmer, ready to take on programming and be a member of the programming community. So if I type print hello world, it does that right there for me. It prints hello world. Notice it doesn't have the quotes anymore because it's not returning a value. It's literally printing to the console. We call this shell window a console sometimes. And so we're printing that hello world string to the console, not including its quotes. We can print in other ways. We can print the values of variables and things like that as well. Let's define a couple variables like x equals 5 and y equals, let's say, 8. I can print x, comma, plus, put a space there, comma, y. Actually, the commas are used when we want to print multiple values in the same print, and they actually add spaces in between them, so I don't actually need to put a space after the plus. But you can see here I'm printing multiple values, x, the value of x, the value, the string value, plus the value of y, and I'm going to say equals, and then lastly I'm going to put the arithmetic expression x plus y. Right? So it's going to say x, the word plus, the value of y, equals, and then whatever that sum is. You can see, oh, 5 plus 8 equals 13. And there we go, right? So this is how we would print multiple values in the same print statement, or at least one way to do that. So that's output, right? What about input? How do I get information to the computer from the user? That's with the input command. And so let's say I don't want to make x 5 and y 8. I want to ask the user what x should be and what y should be. So the way I would do that, I would say x equals input. And you can see that's a built-in function. It's in purple there, just as the print was. It's a built-in function and shows up that way. Notice it's asking for a prompt. So we ask a question. What is the first number to add? Okay. If I do that, it will actually ask that to me. What is the first number to add? And I want to add 10. Okay. And then I can say the same thing for y. Y equals input. What is the second number to add? And it'll ask me, and I'll say 5. Okay. And then I can say, again, print x plus y equals x plus y. And if I do that, 10 plus 5 equals 105. What? That's not right. What happened? This worked just fine the first time, but the second time it seems to have forgotten how to add. Well, that's not the issue. The issue is that the first time x was 5. The second time, whoops, x is 10, but notice that it is 10 in quotes. And y is 5, but y is 5 in quotes. And so what that means is that these are strings. That's the type. It's as though they are words. They might as well be plus and equals as far as the computer is concerned, because it doesn't understand that these are numbers. It understands them as strings, or like words. And so when we add numbers, yeah, that's an arithmetic operation. 5 plus 8 is 13. When we add strings, it's not an arithmetic operation. That's a concatenation. And concatenation is when we put two strings together into one. And so 10 plus 5, if we're talking about strings, is 10 and then the 5 tacked on the end, and that's why it looks like it says 105. So how do we avoid that? I didn't want to treat these as strings. I want to actually treat them as numbers. Well, there are ways to do that. even though x, as we see here, is the string 10, there's a conversion function called int. It's actually it constructs an integer. And if I pass in the value x, which is a string value, it will give me back 10, but notice the lack of quotes. It gives it back as an integer value. So x, keep in mind, is still the string value, but int x returns an integer value of that, an integer representation of that string. It didn't change the string. It just returned an integer representation of that string. It's a function. X is the input, 10 is the output in this case. If I want to change x, I'd have to reassign x, right? Remember, the single equal sign is an assignment operator. X equals the integer representation of itself, right? So make x hold the integer representation of the string 10. And now x would be 10 again, or 10, the value 10, right? We could do the same thing to y, right? Y equals the integer representation of what it used to be, and now y is no longer a 5 in quotes, it's a 5 not in quotes. And if we were to repeat this command now, 10 plus 5 equals 15. So we want to watch out, we want to pay attention to the type, and we want to recognize that the result of any input command, any input function, always returns a string. Okay, that's really important because that can be really confusing. If we want it not to return a string, then we have to perform that conversion. Now, an easier way to perform that conversion that we can do all in one step is to do a composition of functions here, right? We'll take the integer function and pass in as its parameter the value returned from the input function, and then that will convert that value into an integer for us, right? So if I repeat this, it'll ask me again. I'll say 6. If I type x, it's the integer 6, not the string 6, okay? But again, this is like an f of g of x, right? And so it's a composition of functions just like you're used to in math class.